Hey everybody, hope everybody is doing this really swell day. And I'm just waiting for you all to. I just decided to do this spur of the moment, right? I'm going to have an astrology question and answer session today for those of you who pop into the room. I'm talking about any astrological topic that may come up for you. This is a good chance for you to, if you have any questions in regard to how certain things in astrology work, it's a good time to ask. And so just please feel free to type your questions in the chat window. If for any reason you can't hear me, or if my video seems a little bit jerky, please also feel free to let me know. While this is going on, I'm going to look for your questions here in the chat window. Now, I think I remember once before I had an issue with people typing their messages in here. So please, at least somebody, even if you don't have anything to say, please just say something just so I can actually doing anything at all, right? Okay, so let me just kind of turn off the speakers, pause the video. I see one person is here. Somebody's asking what the most accurate house system is. Now, if you hold on a second, I am going to answer that question. Yeah, that's weird. It doesn't show here, right? So please keep your questions coming. I just want to, it's odd because in my Hangout window, it doesn't show things. Otherwise, it does, though. But I'm just going to go ahead and keep talking. I use Campanus house system. And I do work with house cusps with Vedic astrology. I also use equal house, and I tend to use those two systems side by side together. It's a bit complex to give you a full explanation of how I do that. But in answering your question, that's what system I use. And I find that to be the most accurate. Mars Dasha for Cancer Ascendant, that's not something that's simple to say. So I would ask if people can steer away from asking questions about your own particular astrology, and if you can questions about astrology in general, because to answer a question about an individual's astrology altogether, I would really birth chart, because I can't give any simple answers in regard to that, because astrology is more than just a quick glance at your birth chart. It's so much more. And so I wouldn't want to do you a disservice by telling you something and starting you thinking along certain lines only to find out that it's not actually true. So any other questions you have, please feel free to ask, okay? Let's talk a little bit more about houses. Mars Dasha in general. Well, Mars Dasha in general is going to be different for each person. It depends on the dignity of Mars in your chart, right? So I'm never a big fan of just doing general things on dashas, because somebody could have a really strong Mars, and Mars in general is going to be really strong in their chart. It'll be free of stress. They'll fight for a cause, right? But if Mars is weak, well, then that individual is going to feel exhausted a lot, because Mars is the planet of energy. So a lot of it depends on Mars in various divisional. In one area of your life, it will be one way. In another area of your life, it'll be a different way. In short, there's no standard across the board planning a particular dasha in Vedic astrology. It's dependent upon the individual. Which ayanamsha do I use? That is a secret. I'm not going to tell. Shh. Okay. Rahu Ketu transit 2017 for Cancer Ascendant. Okay. Well, I can give you something general about that. Again, I don't want people to get caught up in thinking, oh, wow, my life is going to be really horrible because the astrologer on YouTube said that, based upon me just giving him one simple thing. Right? So Rahu, your focus will, most likely be upon finances, in contrast to where you're more likely used to potentially relying on other people's resources. That's one way of looking at it. In addition to that, you may, on one level, like to put trust in others, but you may be having a hard time doing that, in contrast to putting trust in yourself. But those are just simple things, right? Which Ayanamsha do I use? Should I tell them? I don't know if I should tell them. I don't know if I should tell them. I use a view you've probably never heard of, which is Dhruva Galactic Center, middle of Mula. Okay, so that's the answer to that. When Mars is in Scorpio, 4th house, well, that really depends on the rest of your chart. So again, I do want to say to people, you can ask general questions about astrology. I can give you general answers, but the thing that you need to understand is this may or may not be applicable to your life. Because in order to really understand each of these things, you need to know the person's full birth chart. Okay? And it's not enough to just say Guru in 12th house, Scorpio ascendant, Guru Dasha running. I can't tell you about your life just based on that information. Okay? Because really, I would be telling you things that a lot of it would be partly inaccurate. Okay? Brigu Bindu, can I tell you about Brigu Bindu? I don't use Brigu Bindu that much. I know a lot of astrologers do. It's the destiny point in the chart that can, when certain planets are aspecting it or transiting over it, it can, create either some positive movements if it's a well-positioned planet, Jupiter, and it's transiting a good position in the individual stressful position. It can bring big movements in life. I know I had a transit over my Brigu Bindu last year by a planet. It was a planet forming an angle to it. And what happened was it was financially a really good time. Yeah, and then you can have Saturn transiting it and it can create some difficulties. So it really depends on what's transiting it. But generally it's the midpoint between Moon and Mars. But I don't want to go too deeply into Brigu Bindu because it's not something that I necessarily work with. I do a lot more work with nakshatras and things along those lines. Okay. Somebody's saying Moon Mahadasha for Libra ascendant, 10th Lord Moon in 7th house, Moon in Ashwini nakshatra. Okay. So please, anybody and everybody, ask questions about astrology. That's a good one. Yay. All right. Whoever I002 is, right? Good. Can I please shed some light on nakshatra? Let's talk a little bit about Ashlesha nakshatra. Ashlesha nakshatra gets a really bad, right? People often think if somebody has their moon in Ashlesha nakshatra, that person is going to be very biting and mean and harsh and everything like that. And that's not always necessarily the case. Planets in Ashlesha nakshatra, let's say, for instance, your 8th house Lord is in Ashlesha nakshatra, right? Well, then that can make it so that you like to research topics very, very deeply. You like to go to the root of things, right? You really want to penetrate through to the core about something. You get into something and you're going to find that you get really, really, really into it, right? Ashlesha nakshatra also has the tendency to hypnotize individuals, right? So if you've got a weak Mercury in your chart with Ashlesha nakshatra, or whatever planet is placed in Ashlesha nakshatra, you may find that you kind of get drawn into a trance by something in a manner that's not necessarily good for you. Shall I give an example? Let's say your 10th is in Ashlesha nakshatra and you've got a Mercury hated in Pisces. You might find that you get yourself into the positions with how successful you're going to be, or concerned about how successful you're going to be, or concerned about status, right? Those are just some general things about Ashlesha nakshatra. Somebody's saying, how do planets in the 10th house of the D10 shape a person's career? Well, let's talk about the D10 first of all. Many people think of the D10 as being the career Varga chart. You can look at it for career, but really what the D10 is it's about the successes and great fruits in life. Now, part of that is success with one's career, but you can look at success really with anything in the D10 chart, because that's really what it's for, is for looking at success in relation to something. How do planets in the 10th house of the D10 shape a person's career? Well, you can look at where that planet, what that planet is the lord of, just simply. Let's say, for instance, you've got the lord of the 6th in the 10th, right? Well, that kind of hard work towards your career can make you successful. That struggle can produce good results if the planets if the planets are a bit weak. Well, then you might find yourself in positions where you're struggling unnecessarily and not really getting anywhere. So a lot of it is dependent upon the dignity of the planets. So how do planets in the 10th house of the D10 shape a person's career? They're going to define the manner in which that person goes about establishing or finding their success. Does that happen in a stressful manner? Does it happen in a manner of ease? Does it happen in a Venusian manner? Is the person somewhat artistic? But you can't really just find those things out from one particular thing. In terms of career, you really want to look at several different things within the chart. There's a really wonderful technique I use in order to determine what a person should do for their chosen profession, but it doesn't involve just a simple look at the D10 and seeing the planets that are in the 10th. It really involves examining planets in several different manners in a few different Varga charts. I couldn't show you the entire technique right now. That would take too long. Okay, let's see what everybody else is saying. Rahu in nakshatra in the 4th house. All right, I am giving you, right, a very simple answer. A very simple answer in association with that. I don't want you to start thinking that this is absolutely positively your life and this is the way the rest of your life is going to run, because it may or may not be. So I'm just going to give you some simple things. If there's a weak Mars in the chart, Rahu in Dhanishta nakshatra can make an individual prone to needing validation for who they are. They want attention for, in the particular instance of Rahu in Dhanishta in the 4th house, you might want validation for your emotions, validation for your feelings, right? But one part of you may equally subconsciously not want to express your feelings, because Rahu in the 4th can make it so the individual can, on many levels, become somewhat emotionally controlled in life, right? They don't go into their emotions to the extent that they could, or in a healthy manner, they don't go into their emotions. So instead, those emotions can build up over time, and the individual finds themselves where they're needing to do a large amount of emotional processing. For instance of Rahu in Dhanishta nakshatra, if Mars is strong, that individual is just naturally going to, during their Rahu dasha, likely go through a process of going through their emotions, just trying to be themselves, be true to their emotions, be true to who they are as an individual, and really try to evolve along a path that's going to help them to be solid in relation to themselves and make themselves feel happy in life. And if Mars is not well positioned in the chart, that individual may, in not so helpful manners for their destiny, find themselves seeking validation for their emotions by trying to draw attention to themselves. But that's just a really simple assessment. And the reason that I'm saying that that's like doing things like that is because it can make people start thinking down the wrong path about themselves. So that's why I generally tend to steer away from things like that. Somebody says Mogga is so confusing. Why is Mogga so confusing? You can type your answer there. Tell me why you think Mogga is so confusing. Meanwhile, hey, can somebody give me some here in the column? How's the video on your end? Right? Let me know how the video is going, if things are out of sync with the audio and the video. That's helpful for me to know. Okay, I will tell people, if you start putting all these things in the column, Rahu and Ashlesha nakshatra, 12th house, Mercury combustion retro in third house and Swati nakshatra. I'm a visual person, right? So it begins to kind of flood my head. I like having a chart in front of me so I can look at it and so I can see it. It's just how I am. So some of those I may not go into if you start putting too much information there, right? I'm a pretty sensitive guy. I see things visually from the chart. And if I get my head flooded with all sorts of details, you'll see my brain explode on screen. Really, yeah, it'll go. Yeah, that's what I was wondering about, if the video was a bit blurry on everybody's end. It might be because I'm moving around a lot, right? So we'll see what it does when we get things produced. So just some simple things. Rahu nakshatra. Well, that's going to be kind of difficult if Mercury is combust. Really, the way I like analyzing things like a planet like Rahu is, I'd want to know where Rahu's Lord is. Okay, that's something that's a little more helpful. Okay, somebody who's posting lots of idiotic things on here and you know who you are, just disappear. We don't need you. Thanks. I don't know how a nakshatra known for producing fame can be one of the most physically dissolving Ketu and spiritual nakshatras. Oh, okay. It's not always just for producing fame, right? Physically dissolving and spiritual nakshatras. Well, let's talk a little bit about Mogga nakshatra. Mogga nakshatra makes it. So let's talk a little. Let's go into depth with Mogga nakshatra. That's a good point. I like talking about the nakshatras. Mogga nakshatra is the first of the tamasic nakshatras, right? So let's talk about rajasic energy. Rajasic is like the energy of desire. It's energy of fire, spark, energy of movement. Tamasic is like the energy, just giving some simple attributions to this, of condensing, things becoming heavy, right? Well, Mogga is the first of the tamasic nakshatras. So at the particular point of the journey of the soul through the nakshatras, what happens in Mogga nakshatra is the divine spark of creation, or the soul, if you will, is becoming encased in a material form. On one level, it remembers where it's come from. It remembers its divinity. On another level, it's finding itself in a confusing set of circumstances that it's having to deal with. And it's angry about where it is on some levels. And so it begins to rebel against the heavens and goes, I'm in control here, right? So how does it produce fame? Well, sometimes it can produce fame, but the individual is usually putting all of their hardship to one side in order to achieve that fame, right? How can it be spiritual? Well, if the individual has a good solid Ketu in their chart, then that individual is going to do a really good job of listening to their wisdom. They have a strong Ketu and who have certain planets in Mogga nakshatra, say for instance, their Atmakaraka in Mogga nakshatra, that may be somebody who journeys astrally, who is really into shamanism and things along those lines. So it is a very spiritual nakshatra. It's connected to the ancestors, the Pitris, the ancestral deities, whose job here is to help to guide the soul on its journey, kind of like guardian angels, right? Only they're related to the souls of our ancestors. And they're here to help us and to provide guidance, but they can't interfere on a certain level. They can't step in and actually do things for us. So they hope that they can drop us hints and that we'll actually pick up on these hints and do something about it. And if you have a good solid Ketu, you'll do really good at doing that. If you don't have a very good Ketu, then you're going to likely find yourself in a position where you're not able to do that. You tend to block things out. You may find yourself in positions where you get really proud about things. Okay. Right. You know, I'm not going to name people here. Everybody is okay, except for you just coming in and abusing people, right? We don't need it. Just disappear. And if you don't disappear, we're just going to ignore you anyway. Okay. You have Ketu and Mars in Mogga. Does it make Rahu in Dhanishtha strong? Well, it would depend upon a few different factors. I'd really need to look at your chart. Okay, I'd need to look at all the planets that are influencing Mars. I'd need to know the degree of your Mars in its sign, right? Those are things I would need to know, all right? Basically, Torah Bala concept can be applied from any nakshatra at all. Okay, so you can look at the Tara of one planet to another. You can look at the Tara between your Atmakaraka and your Darakaraka, right? Between yourself and your spouse. And you can see the type of relationship you're likely going to have with your spouse. That's a good thing to do. These are all things that you can do with Torah Bala. Okay. People always talk about a house where it has a stellium. Can you please tell us the 7th aspect of how that stellium's aspect will impact the opposite house, and the 12th impacting 6? Well, when there are a lot of planets in one house, is really going to be very strongly about on the planet that, you know, opposes that. Let's give it for instance, right? Let's say you've got tons of planets in your 12th house. One of those is your Atmakaraka. Well, you might be a person who likes to spend a lot of time alone, right? But you end up having a lot of stress in your life that kind of makes it difficult for you to do that. And you, in order to sort through that stress, you really kind of feel like you need to be in your own space in order to do that, right? Somebody's asking, can I please talk about the D9? Okay, so what are you wanting to know about the D9? Loretta, so please type in one of your questions about the D9, because I could probably talk for, you know, an hour about the D9, right? You know, one thing I'll share with you about the D9 is it's not just the chart of relationships. And it's not just the chart that's related to the soul. One of the main things with the D9 that a lot of people don't know about is it's about individual finds in life, or the meaning that an individual finds. And some of the main things is the individual living a life that's meaningful. That life that's meaningful, is their life focused upon marriage? Is their life focused upon spirituality? What things does that individual find in purpose in life? That's one thing. Just marriage or adult life. It's not just adult life. And I know a lot of people want to look at the Navamsha for that, right? That's not really something that I go into. I mean, I can see the connection with that on many levels, but really broadly what the Navamsha is about, aside from spouse. Because think about it, why do we marry somebody? Well, hopefully you marry somebody or have a long-term relationship with somebody because you find a purpose in your connection with them, right? Hopefully you do that. And so it's those things that we're committed to, those things that we find purpose in, those things that are meaningful to us, right? So you definitely can find marriage in the adult life. One of the most important planets in the Navamsha chart is Venus. Whether you're looking at its perspective or whether you're looking at it from a purpose perspective, because Venus is to make the wise decisions in life that will create meaningful circumstances in our life. Okay. Somebody's saying Sati Sati of Saturn when moon is in Saturn's signs. Is it any better or worse? Really, in order to judge Sati Sati, you need to look at Ashtaka Varga, right? You need to see how strong Saturn is it's transiting the signs that it's in. Okay. So if the moon's in Saturn signs, it may not necessarily be any better or worse. It's going to depend on where Saturn is. That's one factor that's there. And it will also depend on Ashtaka Varga. Okay. Somebody's saying, how do we see transit of Rahu in Cancer sign for Gemini ascendants? Well, your focus might be upon family and how much you care about them and how much you love them. So I'm just giving, if people are wondering, before I get bombarded with these things, I'm just going to give simple assessments with this. I'm giving the, astrologer disclaimer notice that this may or may not pertain to you, okay? Because really, I need to look at your full horoscope. If you want me to do that, hey, you can schedule an astrology page. Shall I do my little song and dance, right? Anyway, I think you know I might schedule something with me. Why is moon debilitated in Scorpio. And Scorpio can represent dark nighttime, and moon shines in nighttime. Well, the moon has an opportunity to shine at nighttime. The moon's not always shining at nighttime because sometimes the moon's new, right? And then you don't see that moon. And so that's one thing to take a look at. Think in terms of what each Rashi represents. Think spiritually, right? So think of the spiritual journey from Aries to Pisces. Aries being that spark coming into being. Pisces being that dissolution. That's the word I want to use. Sorry, I got tongue twisted. Back into the infinite. So at Scorpio, there's that point where the individual has a choice to either focus on their material life, right, or to begin the journey back home. Both of those are usually prompted by satisfaction. Equally, one of the things Jay Meany said in relation to Scorpio, because Jay Meany in Jay Meany Sutras says some really wonderful things about help you to understand them. He says something in regard, I don't remember the exact words, about with Scorpio Swamsha, which is something different, but you can understand Scorpio through this. There's a cavity in the heart, right? There's some, like a need that's empty and not getting fulfilled. And that's one of the reasons that the moon can be debilitated in Scorpio. Okay. Just a couple of ideas, concepts. Do I analyze true or mean Rahu? Wow, that's a good question. And I'm going to give an answer to it. True node isn't true. And mean node isn't really that good. As a matter of fact, there's no perfect calculation for the nodes that any of us have seen so far. I use true node, though. Basically, the mean node, basically what it does is it works with the concept that creation began at a specific time, in a specific year when all the planets lined up at 0 degrees Aries. And over a certain number of years, those planets would have made assertions around the zodiac. So given that, knowing what we can go, Rahu moves this amount per year, that means it would be in this particular direction. But that doesn't match up with when the moon crosses the nodes, which is what creates Rahu and Ketu anyway, is when the path of the moon crosses the path of the sun. That should happen when the moon crosses the north node, and when the moon crosses the south node, it should be at 0 degrees, right? But that doesn't happen with mean node. And true node is set up around calculating it so that when the moon crosses the north node or south node, it's at 0 degrees. But the rest of the time, because of the way the Earth tends to, wobble on its axis, because the moon has a pull on the Earth a little bit, then the rest of the time, the position of Rahu and Ketu can be a little bit inaccurate. But still, I find it's better than using mean node. Okay, but Rahu, with Rahu and Ketu, I tend to use true nodes. All right, let's see some other questions. I didn't want that because it's a long, confusing concept. Saturn, and I'm just reading some things that people put down here. Okay. Does the field of astrology itself have an astrological chart? Well, none of us knows when astrology was created. That's the whole thing, right? Astrology is so old and so vast that there is no written records in terms of when it actually began. We don't have any information of that, so there's not really any way we could have an astrological chart for astrology. Okay, is there something in its chart that keeps it from becoming more accepted than it is? Certain people are more open to spiritual concepts than other people are. Those are the only things that are there. Let's look and see some of the questions that people are positing, because they're popping up rather quickly on my end. I'm going to scroll up the list a little bit. How does Saturn Venus Adagio give results? Well, Saturn Venus Adagio can create some difficulties in relationships. It can also mean that you work harder on your relationship. It may mean that, let's think about whatever Venus is associated with. Let's think about Saturn. Saturn's focus is very narrowly on Saturn. Saturn, dependent on its strength, does Saturn really well. And dependent upon its weakness, it may not do Saturn really well. Right? If it's weak, it doesn't do Saturn well. If it's strong, it does Saturn well, right? So Saturn's just wanting to survive, right? Now, Venus, dependent upon the influence that Venus is giving to Saturn by, planetary aspect or potentially by Rashi aspect, basically Venus can give some support to Saturn upon its path. But equally, if Saturn is, say, neutral, Saturn's in an enemy sign or in a great enemy sign, and it happens to be forming an aspect to Venus, either planetary aspect or Rashi aspect. I like working with Rashi aspects more. Then Saturn can create some separation from Venus, right? If Saturn's exalted, and let's say Saturn's exalted and you've got Venus in Taurus, that's going to, and that's really powerful, positive, and strong. Saturn is not going to difficulty in relationships as one of the general indications, right? As a matter of fact, it will make the focus pretty strongly upon relationships. But you also, of course, want to take into consideration what Saturn's ruling, right? Let's say Saturn is the lord of the first and second, right? And let's say, I'm sorry, no, let's change that. Let's make Saturn the lord of the 10th and the 11th, okay? Which is for an Aries ascendant. And let's say you've got Venus in Taurus, right? That's going to be a really powerful chart for business and for finances, dependent upon the degrees of those planets, several other factors, okay? That's just a simple answer. You have to think about what each planet does. Good thing to learn is the what a planet represents in the royal court of planets. Venus is the minister in material affairs. Are you making wise choices? Saturn's the servant. Saturn's the servant who can carry out the. If Saturn's weakened, his capacity to carry out those plans. If Saturn's strong, then his capacity to carry out those plans is going to be influenced by wise counsel. Yeah, it's a good way to understand it. All right, so let's scroll down further. Atmakaraka Mercury, 26 degrees in Ashadha, 9th house. Well, that's a Mercury that is going to be in a state that's called Mrita. Okay, when a planet is Mrita, it's considered dead, which doesn't mean that you're going to die or anything like that. It generally tends to represent karma that the individual has been working on for many different lifetimes. And so with that planet, they have already kind of done that, and they may still have some residue to want to continue whatever that planet is prompting them to do in the chart, but it may not turn out to be quite as fluent as they might like for it to be. So in terms of Mercury's Vimshotri lordship of Ashleisha nakshatra, well, that in relation to spiritual things, you get really drawn in, right? You're a person who's very philosophical, who's very thoughtful, but you may sometimes not know when to stop. And that can occasionally be a problem for you because you get caught up in things, right? Venus in Swati nakshatra, how to interpret? That's a good idea. I don't know how to interpret it unless you tell me the degree of your Rahu and where Rahu's lord is, okay? And the degree of Venus and a few other things, okay? Because, Venus in Swati nakshatra, well, it might make the person not like to be in relationships with just one person, but it might not do that either. It depends on the different things. But people, I would say one thing across the board with Venus in Swati nakshatra, the person will either attract a spouse who's independent by nature, if it's a man, or they may need independence in their relationships because they're going to be rather restless. If Rahu is in a sign where, say, its lord is debilitated, then it might be that that individual gets restless in relationships and may be prone to more than one relationship at a time, so to speak. It means when Saturn karma is conjunct Ketu, been there, done that. Things connected with Ketu and Saturn, people with Ketu Saturn in their chart, and this is not a judgment, so please don't perceive it as such. Ketu Saturn has an inner need to be an authority figure because in a previous lifetime they were an authority about something, right? Some particular field, whatever Saturn's ruling in the chart, they could have been an authority on those particular things. And so they remember that, and in this lifetime, when their authority isn't respected, it's kind of difficult for them, right? That's one thing with it. Yeah. Rahu in Rohini, 14 degrees. Okay, so that's where's the moon? Okay. You see, I keep telling you it's not simple, and by the time you give me the answers, your details are going to be so far up the screen, I'm not going to be able to find them. Combust Jupiter results. Let's talk about a combust planet. That's one I'll answer for you. Okay, let's hold off on the other one. When a planet is combust, now, first of all, to properly calculate combustion, you need good astrology, because a lot of astrology calculate combustion in the right manner. Okay, so what happens with the combust planet? First of all, when a planet is combust, whatever that planet is related to, whatever it rules in the chart, the individual is going to feel somewhat of an incompatibility with those things, right? But in order to really truly know if a planet is combust, you need to it needs to be calculated in a special way. It has to be calculated as per local space. Have you ever, had somebody say, wow, Venus is conjuncting Jupiter right now, and you think in your head, wow, that's great, I'm going to go outside and I'm going to look up in the sky and I'll see Jupiter and Venus really close to each other, only you look up in the sky and they're like this far apart, and you go, wow, how are those two planets conjunct each other? Well, that's associated with where you are on the planet. Okay, another point on the planet, those two planets will appear closer to each other, but at other areas on the planet, they'll appear further apart. And it's a similar combustion, right? Combustion is based upon local space. So that's something that you can't just go, it's this number of degrees or that number of degrees. That's one way of calculating it, but it doesn't always turn out accurate. The way of calculating combustion from Surya Siddhanta does come out much more accurate, but I can't go into depth with that right now. Otherwise, the gods of astrology would kill me. No, I'm only kidding. It's just that it's just too long-winded of a subject. But what basically happens with combustion is, here is a coffee cup. Here's my hand. No, I'm only kidding. Here's the sun. Here's that combust planet. Okay. Over here, you've got a 2-pound coin. No, really, you've got the Earth. Okay. So here's the sun. Here's the Earth. Here's that combust planet. It's over behind the sun, and the rays of that planet can't get through the sun in order to shine on the Earth. So the rays of the planet get disrupted from shining on the Earth. And so there's an incompatibility with whatever that planet represents. Okay? How about retrograde planets, particularly Saturn? One of the main astrology I find is that people become so overly concerned with what a planet externally. What is this going to create in my life? Right? Joke here. I hope everybody can handle it. Is God going to give me a cookie on my 23rd birthday? Am I going to get the best job in the world? Am I going to meet my, love of my life? Those are the things people focus on with astrology. And so when a planet that relates to any of those things is retrograde, they go, oh no, my life is going to be horrible, right? And it's not always necessarily like that. As a matter of fact, some of my best times for traveling have been when Mercury is retrograde. I've signed a lot of really good contracts when Mercury's retrograde too. So it doesn't always work that way. But what happens when a planet is retrograde is its process becomes more internalized rather than externally focused, right? So when Mercury's retrograde, let's talk about Mercury for a moment. I know you said Saturn. We'll come to Saturn here in a moment. Well, let's talk about Saturn. So Saturn, when Saturn's moving forward, you may encounter all these difficulties in your life, areas that require your discipline and really require your attention, and your life becomes focused upon those particular things. Well, when Saturn's retrograde, you're going through the process of crystallizing the whole process that you've just been through with Saturn, okay? So that's what's happening with a planet when it's direct or when it's retrograde. In terms of a planet natally retrograde, well, sometimes those individuals can be much more reserved. They may be like their own authority figure, right? They don't need a father or a mother to boss them around. They'll do that themselves, right? And sometimes those things happen. But those individuals equally can take information in many times, and dependent upon the nature of Saturn, and really kind of crystallize it into their creative processes, because they do have a more internally focused Saturn. But that's just a broad answer to that question. Okay, anybody else with any more questions? I can probably go for about another 5-6 minutes. Okay. Any more questions pop up? So let me scroll up the screen here. Let's see if I... Okay. Here we go. People are asking more questions. Venus in Purva Palguni in the 10th house. Okay, well, a lot of that depends on your 10th lord. Depends on what Venus rules in the chart. Okay, so, and a lot of it depends on the degree of Venus. I do a lot of work with things that a lot of astrologers don't do. And that is, I work with the Baladi Avastas and the Jagradati Avastas. And they tend to give a lot of indications of how a planet in a nakshatra can function. Okay. Venus in Purva Palguni nakshatra. Well, that means that, it depends on how Venus is disposed with Venus, lots of different things. That individual be very good at making wise decisions that make their life flow in a good manner. They can be very good partners to be with. For them, relationships can be very important, right? Venus in the 10th house is just naturally going to be strong on some levels anyway, because it's in the 10th house, and planets like being in the 10th on some levels. That can't be taken as a stamp across the board. In terms of creating things, planets in the 10th house can, so let's say Venus is the lord of, well, let's see. So Venus is in the 10th house. That's going to depend on your chart. But let's say Venus is the lord of the 10th and is in the 10th house, right? Well, Venus can create career associated with the person being a teacher, or equally with the person working with women's products of any type, or a wedding type career, things along those lines, or yeah, all sorts of things. Make good career decisions. There are so many things that can happen with that combination. All right, let's see what we've got here. Atmakaraka in an enemy sign in the D9. Okay, let's look at planets in an enemy sign. Something on one level that's called a deep tadi avasta. Okay, and when a planet's in an enemy sign, it tends to feel miserable. Okay, so whatever that planet's in an enemy sign in a trikona in the D9. So on some level on your dharmic path, dependent upon which Rashi that's in, you may find it easy on one level. In other words, it's very easy for you to walk a certain path, but that path doesn't bring you any happiness, right? That's just a simple answer to that. Ketu conjunct Moon in the 11th house of Pisces. I'm not going to, how will it affect the person? I can give some general assessments with that. Ketu conjunct the Moon in the 11th. Ketu in the 11th. First of all, individuals with this placement, previous lifetime followed a path that inspires them, and dependent upon the Ketu, they found those particular paths successful. But let's say they found it successful. Well, part of the way that they were able to walk that path was by taking their emotions and just compartmentalizing their emotions, putting them in a certain place, not dealing with them, right? Because by the very nature of that person, they're very sensitive in general. But the world doesn't respect sensitive people. It's just a world about how much you're earning, how much you're not earning, things along those lines, right? So in order to get by in the world, those people tend to develop coping mechanisms. And one of the ways they cope is by taking all of their emotions and just kind of putting them in a certain place without really, dealing with them effectively. So then what happens? Somebody comes along and goes, "You've got something on your shirt." And that person takes it really personally, and they're upset and sad for 2 weeks at a time, when really it was just one simple thing. But they had been kind of putting all their emotions in one place, and they didn't get another 11th house thing for who they are. Instead, somebody noticed a problem, and then they go into some really deep emotional funk, and it takes a long time for them to get out of those emotional funks. And the best thing you can do with people who have Ketu Moon interactions is to just let them work through their own processes, because that's what they need more than anything else. And they also need to learn to not repress their emotions. Okay. Planetary war. Now back to combustion. Planetary war is something similar to combustion. It gets calculated incorrectly by a lot of people. A lot of times people just go, okay, this planet is within a degree of that planet. They're in planetary war. Not always, because it's an observational phenomenon. Okay. And dependent on where you are on the planet, it may not be able to be observed in a manner that would actually make those two planets in planetary war. And again, the correct way to calculate planetary war goes back to calculations in Surya Siddhanta, but astrologers just got lazy over time and just decided, well, I don't want to do all that complicated math in my head, and who can blame them, right? Instead, I just want to look at these planets and know they're this close together. And since we're at the Vedic astrology originated in India, then going to be in that position. But other areas, they're not always war, because planetary war should be an observational phenomenon. So it depends on the on where you are on the planet. You can probably tell I'm getting tired. I think it's time to stop soon. So let's talk about what planetary war actually does. Well, the planet that loses in planetary war is going to be the planet that has a certain amount of its strength taken away by the other planet. Okay, and that's a good way to read planetary war. All right, so thanks everybody for your comments. Please do also feel free to schedule an astrological consultation through my astrological consultation page if you would like to. Sorry to keep it brief. I just did this spur of the moment because I felt like it. So I didn't have anything prepared. So a lot of this I just did off the top of my head. So thanks everybody, and hope to talk to everybody soon. Bye now.